Sometimes a single moment can shatter everything you thought you knew about respect, family, and the secrets people carry. I'm Emma Parker. I'm 32 years old, and I work the night shift at Millbrook General Hospital's emergency room. What I'm about to tell you happened at my sister's wedding, where I discovered that sometimes the people who judge you the harshest are the ones hiding the biggest truths. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn when the wedding invitation arrived, nestled between a stack of medical journals and overdue bills on my kitchen counter. The envelope was thick, expensive cream paper with gold embossing that caught the light from my small apartment window. When I opened it, Rachel's perfect calligraphy announced her upcoming marriage to Michael Mitchell at the Riverside Country Club. The invitation was beautiful, formal, everything Rachel had always dreamed of. But as I read through the details, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. While other family members were listed as part of the wedding party or given special roles, my name appeared only on the guest list, almost as an afterthought. Lily, my 7-year-old daughter, bounded into the kitchen wearing her school uniform, her backpack dragging behind her like a loyal puppy. She peered over my shoulder at the invitation, her eyes widening at the fancy lettering. "Is that from Aunt Rachel?" she asked, her voice filled with the kind of excitement only children can muster for special events. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained that her aunt was getting married, and we were invited to the celebration. The truth was, Rachel and I hadn't spoken properly in months. Our relationship had been strained ever since I made the decision to keep Lily and raise her as a single mother. While Rachel had flourished in her real estate career, buying her dream house in Oakwood Estates and planning her perfect wedding, I had been working double shifts at the hospital, struggling to balance motherhood with my demanding job as an emergency room nurse. Our mother, Patricia, had made it clear over the years that she viewed my life choices as impulsive and irresponsible, while Rachel represented everything a daughter should be: successful, engaged to a respectable man, living the American dream. The Mitchell family was well known in Millbrook. Michael's father, Robert Mitchell, had been a police detective for 30 years before retiring with full honors. Everyone called him Bob, and his reputation in our small Ohio town was impeccable. He was the kind of man who commanded respect simply by walking into a room, whose opinion carried weight in community discussions, whose word was trusted without question. The Mitchells lived in a beautiful colonial house on Elm Street, the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every mailbox was painted to match the shutters. As I sat at my small kitchen table, looking at the invitation while Lily chattered about what dress she might wear, I found myself wrestling with a familiar internal battle. Part of me wanted to decline politely, to avoid what I knew would be an uncomfortable evening of sideways glances and whispered comments about my life choices. The other part of me, the part that remembered the little girl who used to share a bedroom with Rachel and dream about each other's future weddings, desperately wanted to be there for my sister's special day. I thought about all the family gatherings I'd missed over the years, all the times I'd chosen to work an extra shift, rather than face the subtle disapproval that seemed to follow me like a shadow. I thought about how Lily had never really gotten to know her extended family, how she'd grown up with just me and occasional visits from her grandfather Frank, who was the only one who seemed to accept us exactly as we were. Maybe this wedding could be different. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from my own family. The decision crystallized when Lily looked up at me with her bright eyes and asked, "Will there be dancing at the wedding, Mommy? Can I wear my sparkly shoes?" Her innocent excitement reminded me that this wasn't just about my complicated relationship with Rachel or my fears about facing judgment from the Mitchell family. This was about giving my daughter the chance to experience joy, to be part of something beautiful, to see that we belonged somewhere. That weekend, I took Lily to Bella's Boutique, a small dress shop downtown that I'd walked past countless times but never entered. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was incredibly kind as she helped me find something appropriate for a fall wedding. We settled on a navy blue dress with 3/4 sleeves, simple but elegant, that fit my budget and made me feel like I could hold my own among Rachel's more affluent friends. For Lily, we found a pink dress with a white cardigan that made her feel like a princess. As September rolled into its final weeks, I found myself both dreading and anticipating the wedding. My shifts at the hospital were particularly challenging that month. We'd had several serious accidents, including a multi-car collision that had brought in a family of 4, all critically injured. Nights like those reminded me why I'd chosen emergency medicine, despite the long hours and emotional toll. There's something about being the person who stands between life and death, who provides comfort in the darkest moments, that gives life meaning beyond personal struggles. The week before the wedding, I ran into my cousin Jessica at the grocery store. She was Rachel's age, worked as a social media influencer, and had always been part of the family's inner circle. As we chatted in the produce aisle, she mentioned how excited everyone was about the wedding, how beautiful the venue was going to be, how impressed everyone was with Michael's family. Then she paused, looking slightly uncomfortable, and said, "I'm sure it'll be nice for you to get out and socialize. You work so much, Emma. People barely see you anymore." Her words stung because they contained enough truth to hurt. I had become somewhat of a ghost in my own family, present but peripheral, invited but not truly included. The demands of single motherhood and my career had created a barrier between me and the rest of the Parker family. A barrier that had grown, higher with each missed birthday party, each declined invitation, each time I'd chosen work over family obligations. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden light that makes autumn in Ohio feel magical. I woke up early, despite having worked a 12-hour shift the night before, and started getting ready with the kind of careful attention I usually reserved for job interviews or parent-teacher conferences. I curled my hair, applied makeup with more precision than usual, and slipped into the navy dress that had been hanging in my closet for weeks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lily was beside herself with excitement, spinning in her pink dress and practicing her fancy walking across our small living room. She'd been talking about the wedding for weeks, asking questions about what weddings were like, whether she'd get to eat cake, if there would be flowers everywhere. Her joy was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely excited about the day ahead. We arrived at the Riverside Country Club 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The venue was even more beautiful than I'd imagined, with its sweeping views of the Scioto River and gardens that looked like they'd been painted by an artist's brush. Fall flowers arranged in elegant displays lined the walkways, and string lights were already twinkling in the trees, ready for the evening reception. As we walked through the main entrance, I was struck by the elegance of everything around us. The lobby featured marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and everywhere I looked, I saw people dressed in their finest clothes, chatting and laughing with the easy confidence that comes from belonging. Lily's hand was tight in mine, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur of the space. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Rachel looked radiant in her wedding gown, a vision of lace and satin that seemed to float as she walked down the aisle. Michael waited for her at the altar with a smile that lit up his entire face, and even from our seats in the back, I could see the love between them. For a moment, all my complicated feelings about family dynamics faded away, and I was simply happy for my sister. During the ceremony, I found myself studying the Mitchell family. Bob Mitchell sat in the front row, distinguished in his dark suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. His wife Sarah sat beside him, elegant in a burgundy dress that complemented the wedding colors. They looked like the kind of family that appeared in magazine advertisements for luxury cars or retirement planning services. Successful, stable, established. As the ceremony concluded and guests began moving toward the cocktail hour on the terrace, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. This was always the hardest part of family events. The mingling, the small talk, the inevitable. Questions about my life that I never quite knew how to answer without feeling defensive. Lily and I made our way to the terrace, where servers were circulating with appetizers and drinks. The view of the river was spectacular, with the late afternoon, sun casting everything in a warm, golden glow. I accepted a glass of wine and tried to look relaxed as I scanned the crowd for familiar faces. That's when I first encountered Bob Mitchell up close. He was standing near the bar, talking with several other men who I recognized as prominent, members of the Millbrook community. As I approached to get Lily a glass of juice, he glanced in my direction. I offered a polite smile and a small wave, expecting the kind of courteous acknowledgement that typically passes between in-laws at family events. Instead, Bob's expression remained completely neutral. He looked at me for a moment, then turned, back to his conversation without any sign of recognition or greeting. It was as if I were invisible, just another face in the crowd with no connection to his family or the celebration. The dismissal was so complete, so casual, that it took me a moment to process what had happened. I told myself it was nothing personal. Maybe he simply hadn't recognized me, or maybe he was preoccupied with his conversation. But as the cocktail hour continued, I noticed a pattern. Bob Mitchell seemed to know everyone at the wedding, greeting guests with warmth and familiarity, shaking hands, exchanging jokes, playing the role of the proud father of the groom with natural ease. Everyone except me. When the reception moved into the main ballroom, I discovered that Lily and I had been seated at table 16, positioned near the kitchen doors and far from the head table where both families were seated. The placement felt deliberate, a subtle but clear message about our place in the family hierarchy. Other tables were filled with Rachel's college friends, Michael's co-workers, and various extended family members, all engaged in animated conversations. As dinner was served, I watched Bob Mitchell work the room like the seasoned public servant he'd been for 3 decades. He moved from table to table, greeting guests, sharing stories, accepting congratulations on his son's marriage. His presence commanded respect, and it was clear that everyone in the room held him in high regard. When he reached our area of the ballroom, he spoke warmly with the people at table 15, then table 17, but somehow managed to walk past our table without making eye contact. The slight was so obvious that even Lily noticed. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging on my sleeve, "why didn't that man say hello to us?" I didn't have a good answer for her. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes adults choose to be unkind for reasons that have nothing to do with you personally? As the evening progressed, I found myself feeling increasingly isolated. Other family members offered polite greetings, but conversations were brief and superficial. I overheard snippets of discussion about Rachel's success in real estate, Michael's recent promotion at the accounting firm, and various family updates that I'd missed due to my absence from recent gatherings. It became clear that I wasn't just physically seated at the periphery of the celebration. I was emotionally and socially there as well. The moment that changed everything came during the father of the groom's speech. Bob Mitchell had been introduced with great fanfare, and he stood at the microphone with the confidence of someone accustomed to addressing crowds. He spoke eloquently about his son, about the joy of gaining a daughter-in-law, about the importance of family and community. His words were warm and heartfelt, and the room hung on every syllable. As his speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of remaining in my seat at the back of the room, I stood up and began walking toward the head table. Lily looked up at me with confusion, but I squeezed her hand and whispered that we were going to say hello to the groom's father. I approached Bob Mitchell as he was accepting congratulations from other guests. When I reached him, I extended my hand and said, "Mr. Mitchell, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Emma Parker, Rachel's sister." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Bob Mitchell's face, which had been flushed with pride and satisfaction from his speech, drained of all color. His eyes widened, and for a moment, he seemed unable to speak. His hand, which had been reaching out to shake mine, stopped midair, and he stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost. "Emma Parker," he repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. The confidence and authority that had characterized his demeanor all evening evaporated in an instant. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd made a terrible mistake, whose carefully constructed world had suddenly shifted on its axis. The silence stretched between us, becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Other guests began to notice that something was wrong, their conversations trailing off as they sensed the tension that had suddenly appeared in the room. Sarah Mitchell, who had been standing nearby, approached with a concerned expression. "Bob," she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Bob Mitchell's eyes never left my face as he struggled to compose himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was different from the confident tone he'd used all evening. "Emma Parker," he said again, as if testing the words. "You're the Emma Parker who works at Millbrook General Hospital?" I nodded, confused by his reaction, but beginning to sense that something significant was happening. "Yes, I'm an emergency room nurse there. Have we met before, Mr. Mitchell?" What happened next would change not only the rest of the evening, but my entire understanding of my place in this family and this community. Bob Mitchell took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his words carried the weight of years of regret and recognition. "Emma," he said, his voice now steady but filled with emotion, "I owe you an apology. A bigger apology than you could possibly imagine." The silence that followed Bob Mitchell's words hung in the air like morning fog over the Scioto River. I could hear the distant clinking of glasses and muted conversations from other parts of the ballroom, but our little corner of the reception had become a bubble of tension that seemed to expand with each passing second. Sarah Mitchell's hand remained on her husband's arm, her eyes darting between us with growing concern. Other guests had begun to notice the unusual interaction, and I could feel their curious gazes settling on our small group. Bob Mitchell's transformation was startling to witness. The man who had commanded the room just minutes earlier, who had delivered his speech with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking, now looked vulnerable and uncertain. His distinguished bearing had given way to something that looked almost like fear, and I found myself wondering what could possibly cause such a dramatic shift in someone so composed. "Mr. Mitchell," I said carefully, "I'm not sure I understand. We've never met before tonight, have we?" Even as I asked the question, something nagged at the back of my mind, a sense of familiarity that I couldn't quite place. There was something about his eyes, the set of his jaw, that felt like an echo of a memory I couldn't quite grasp. He rubbed his forehead with one hand, a gesture that seemed to age him years in a matter of seconds. 3 years ago, he said slowly, there was a night in February, a car accident on Route 23 just outside town. Multiple vehicles, terrible conditions. His voice carried the weight of someone revisiting a painful memory. "Do you remember that night, Emma?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. February 15th, 3 years ago. One of the worst nights of my career at Millbrook General. A chain reaction accident involving 5 vehicles had brought in 8 critically injured patients within the span of 20 minutes. The emergency room had been chaos-controlled bedlam, with every available staff member working frantically to save lives. I remembered the bitter cold outside, the way the automatic doors kept opening to admit paramedics with stretchers, the constant beeping of monitors and urgent calls for additional blood supplies. "I remember," I said quietly. "It was one of the worst accidents we'd seen in years." What I didn't say was that it was also the night that had nearly broken me professionally. We had lost 2 patients that night, despite everything we'd done, and I had spent weeks afterward questioning whether I was strong enough to continue in emergency medicine. Bob Mitchell nodded, his face grave. My partner and I were first on the scene. Detective Martinez and I had been working late, following up on a case, when the calls started coming in. He paused, taking a shaky breath. The first car we reached, a blue Honda Civic, was completely crushed on the driver's side. The woman inside. He stopped, unable to continue for a moment. Sarah Mitchell's grip on her husband's arm tightened, and I could see recognition dawning in her eyes. Whatever story he was about to tell, she knew it, and she knew it was important. The woman inside was barely conscious, Bob continued. Margaret Sullivan, 46 years old, mother of 3. The paramedics said she had maybe 20 minutes before she'd lose too much blood. They were doing everything they could, but the injuries were severe. Internal bleeding, possible spinal damage, and she kept fading in and out of consciousness. I began to remember more details from that terrible night. The woman in the blue Honda had arrived at the hospital in critical condition, her vital signs barely registering. She had been one of our most challenging cases, requiring immediate surgery and every resource we could marshal. But there had been something else about her case, something that had made it particularly heartbreaking. She kept asking about her children, I said, the memory becoming clearer. She was more worried about them than her own injuries. She wanted someone to call her ex-husband to make sure the kids were okay. Bob Mitchell's eyes filled with tears, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Those children were my grandchildren, Emma. Margaret was my son David's ex-wife. They'd been divorced for 2 years, but she was still family to us. Still the mother of our grandchildren. The revelation hit me with stunning force. David Mitchell, Michael's older brother, had been killed in Afghanistan 4 years earlier. I remembered reading about it in the local newspaper, how the community had rallied around the Mitchell family in their grief. What I hadn't known was that he had left behind a wife and children, or that his death had created the kind of complicated family dynamics that divorce and tragedy often leave in their wake. Margaret didn't have anyone else, Bob continued. Her parents were gone, she had no siblings, and her relationship with David's family had been strained since the divorce. When we got that call about the accident, Sarah and I rushed to the hospital, not knowing if she would survive, not knowing what would happen to Emma, Jack, and little Sophie if she didn't. I was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened that night, and why Bob Mitchell's reaction to meeting me had been so intense. But there was more to the story, something that explained the guilt and gratitude I was seeing in his eyes. The thing is, Bob said, looking directly at me now, Margaret told us later that there was one nurse who made all the difference that night. One person who didn't just treat her injuries, but who sat with her when she was terrified, who held her hand when she thought she was going to die, who promised her that everything possible was being done to save her life. The memory was flooding back now, painful and vivid. Margaret Sullivan had indeed been one of our most critical patients that night, but she had also been one of the most frightened. Between her surgeries and procedures, during the long hours when we were monitoring her condition and hoping for improvement, I had spent time at her bedside. It wasn't part of my official duties, but something about her desperation to live for her children had touched me deeply. She kept a piece of paper in her wallet, Bob continued, with the name of the nurse who had been so kind to her. She said this nurse had promised to personally make sure her children were contacted, had stayed past the end of her shift to be there when Margaret woke up from surgery, had even brought her a cup of tea and sat with her during one of the worst nights of her life. I remembered that tea. It had been nearly dawn, and Margaret had been awake and scared, still in considerable pain despite the medication. I had been at the end of a double shift, exhausted and emotionally drained, but something about her vulnerability had compelled me to stay a little longer, to offer whatever comfort I could provide. For 3 years, Bob said, his voice growing, stronger now. Sarah and I have been trying to find a way to thank the nurse who saved Margaret's life. Not just medically, though that was crucial, but emotionally. Margaret credits that nurse with giving her the strength to fight, with making her believe that someone cared whether she lived or died. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "We've called the hospital several times," she said, "but they wouldn't give us any personal information about staff members. We tried going through official channels, but everything kept getting lost in bureaucracy and privacy policies. We even considered hiring a private investigator, but that seemed excessive for a simple thank you." The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. For the entire evening, I had felt dismissed and overlooked by this man, had interpreted his lack of acknowledgement as judgment about my life choices and social status. Meanwhile, he had been carrying gratitude toward me for 3 years, not knowing that the nurse who had touched his family's life was sitting just a few tables away from him. "Margaret is doing well now," Bob continued. "She made a full recovery, went back to work, and has been an amazing mother to those 3 kids. But she never forgot what you did for her that night, Emma. And neither did we. She still talks about the angel nurse who held her hand and promised everything would be okay." I felt tears forming in my own eyes as the full weight of the misunderstanding became clear. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, "I had no idea. I mean, I remembered Margaret, remembered that night, but I never knew she was connected to your family. If I had known—" "That's just it," Bob interrupted. "You didn't do what you did because you knew who she was or because you thought it would benefit you somehow. You did it because that's who you are. Because you're the kind of person who stays late to comfort a scared patient, who goes beyond your job description to provide care, who treats everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances." The revelation was transforming not just my understanding of Bob Mitchell's behavior that evening, but my understanding of my own worth and the impact of my work. So often in emergency medicine, we see patients at their most vulnerable moments, provide critical care, and then never learn the rest of their stories. We don't find out whether they recovered fully, whether they went on to live fulfilling lives, whether the care we provided made a lasting difference. Sarah Mitchell reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. "This is Margaret with her children at Emma's high school graduation last month," she said, handing me the picture. "She's the one in the blue dress. She insists that she owes her life to the kindness of a stranger, to a nurse who treated her, like she mattered when she felt most alone in the world." Looking at the photograph, I could see that Margaret had indeed made a complete recovery. She was smiling broadly, her arm around a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, with 2 younger children beaming beside them. They looked like a family that had weathered significant storms but had emerged stronger and more united. "We've been carrying guilt for 3 years," Bob admitted. "Guilt that we never properly thanked the person who helped save our family. And now, to discover that this person has been part of our extended family all along, that I've been ignoring and dismissing someone who showed such extraordinary kindness to people I love." He trailed off, shaking his head in dismay. The complexity of the situation was beginning to sink in. Here was a man who had spent his career in law enforcement, someone trained to notice details and make connections, who had failed to recognize the person sitting in his own son's wedding reception as someone who had profoundly impacted his family. The disconnect between his public persona and his personal blind spots was striking. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "Margaret wanted to do something to thank you, to show her appreciation in a concrete way. She's been saving money. For 3 years, a little bit from each paycheck, hoping that someday we'd find you. She wanted to make a donation to the hospital in your name, or to a charity of your choice, or just to find some way to pay forward the kindness you showed her. The gesture was overwhelming in its thoughtfulness and generosity. Here was a single mother, someone who had faced her own financial struggles and challenges, who had been setting aside money for years to thank someone who had simply done their job with compassion. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. That night was one of the hardest of my career. We lost 2 patients, and I questioned whether I was cut out for emergency medicine. If anything, Margaret helped me as much as I helped her. Her determination to survive, her love for her children, reminded me why I chose this profession in the first place. Bob Mitchell looked around the ballroom, taking in the elegant surroundings and the celebration continuing around us. "Emma," he said, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you recognition for the kind of person you are, the kind of professional you are, and I owe you respect for the way you've chosen to live your life." The conversation was drawing attention from nearby guests, but in a different way than before. Instead of curious stares and whispered speculation, people seemed to sense that something meaningful was happening, something that transcended the usual wedding reception small talk. Lily, who had been standing quietly beside me throughout this exchange, tugged on my dress. "Mommy," she whispered, "why is everyone crying?" It was a fair question. Sarah Mitchell was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Bob's eyes were bright, with unshed tears, and I could feel my own emotions threatening to overwhelm me. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes adults discover they've been wrong about important things? That sometimes misunderstandings can be cleared up in ways that change everything? Sometimes, I told her quietly, people find out that they've been missing something important, and it makes them happy and sad at the same time. Bob Mitchell knelt down to Lily's eye level, his expression gentle and kind. "And you must be Emma's daughter," he said. "I can see where you get your beautiful smile." Lily beamed at the compliment, her natural shyness giving way to the charm that had always made her popular with patients and staff at the hospital. "My mommy helps sick people get better," she said proudly. "She works really hard, and sometimes she's tired, but she always helps people." "Yes, she does," Bob agreed, looking up at me with something that looked like wonder. "Your mommy is a very special person, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that." The rest of the wedding reception took on a completely different character after that conversation. Bob Mitchell made a point of introducing me to other guests, not as Rachel's sister who worked at the hospital, but as the nurse who had made such a difference in his family's life. Sarah insisted that Lily and I move to a table closer to the family, where we could be part of the central celebration rather than observers from the periphery. Michael, the groom, was initially confused by his father's sudden change in behavior toward me, but when the story was explained, his reaction was one of amazement and gratitude. "Dad's been talking about finding that nurse for years," he told me. "He felt like we had unfinished business, like we owed a debt we could never repay. I can't believe you've been here all along." Rachel's reaction was more complicated. She seemed pleased that the tension between her new father-in-law and her sister had been resolved, but I could see her struggling to process the revelation that I had played such a significant role in the Mitchell family's life without anyone knowing. It challenged her assumptions about my place in the family hierarchy and forced her to reconsider some of her own judgments about my choices and circumstances. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations with people who had heard the story and wanted to express their own appreciation for healthcare workers, or to share their own experiences with medical professionals who had made a difference in their lives. The narrative of the evening had shifted from a celebration of Michael and Rachel's marriage to something broader and more inclusive, a recognition of the ways that ordinary people can have extraordinary impacts on each other's lives. Margaret Sullivan's story became a centerpiece of many conversations that night. Several guests mentioned knowing her, having worked with her, or having children who attended school with her kids. The revelation that she had survived such a serious accident and that her recovery had been aided by someone now part of their extended family created a sense of connection and community that went beyond the typical wedding reception dynamics. Bob Mitchell sought me out several more times throughout the evening, each time seeming to discover new aspects of the situation that amazed or moved him. He told me about Margaret's children, about how Emma, the oldest, had gone on to excel in school and was now planning to study nursing herself, inspired partly by the story of the nurse who had helped her mother. Jack, the middle child, had developed an interest in emergency services and was considering a career as a paramedic. Even little Sophie, who had been only 4 at the time of the accident, remembered the night her mother had been hurt and had often talked about the kind nurse who had taken care of her. The impact of that February night had rippled through an entire family's life in ways I had never imagined. Margaret's recovery had been complete, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had emerged from the experience with a renewed appreciation for life, a deeper commitment to her children, and a desire to help others in whatever way she could. She volunteers at the hospital now, Sarah told me during one of our conversations. Once a week, she helps in the children's ward, reading to kids who are scared or lonely. She says she's paying forward the kindness that someone showed her when she needed it most. The circularity of Margaret's story, from patient to volunteer, from recipient of care to provider of comfort, exemplified the best aspects of human nature and community support. It demonstrated how acts of kindness, even those performed as part of one's professional duties, can inspire ongoing cycles of generosity and service. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Bob Mitchell approached me one final time. "Emma," he said, "I hope you'll forgive me for the way I treated you earlier. I was inexcusably rude, and I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I hope we can start over, and I hope you'll allow me to properly welcome you to our family." The word family carried particular weight in that moment. For so long, I had felt like an outsider in my own family, the one whose choices were questioned, and whose circumstances were viewed with disappointment. To be welcomed into another family, and to be welcomed specifically because of my professional dedication and personal character, felt like a form of validation I hadn't realized I needed. "Of course," I said. "I understand completely. None of us could have predicted this connection, and I'm grateful that we discovered it." But even as I spoke the words of forgiveness, I was processing the deeper implications of the evening's revelations. The experience had forced me to confront my own assumptions about judgment and acceptance, about the ways that we categorize people based on limited information, about the stories we tell ourselves about our worth and our place in the world. For 3 years, I had carried the memory of that terrible February night as one of professional challenge and personal doubt. Now I would carry it as a reminder of the profound impact that compassion and dedication can have, even when we're not aware of it. The work I did every night in the emergency room wasn't just about medical procedures and clinical outcomes. It was about human connection, about treating people with dignity during their most vulnerable moments, about recognizing the inherent worth of every person who came through our doors. As Lily and I prepared to leave the wedding reception, she looked up at me with the kind of serious expression that children sometimes adopt when they're processing complex adult situations. "Mommy," she said, "I think that man likes you now." "Yes, sweetie," I replied. "I think he does." "Good," she said with satisfaction, "because you're the best mommy and the best nurse, and everyone should know that." Her simple declaration, delivered with the absolute certainty that only children possess, felt like the perfect conclusion to an evening that had transformed my understanding of recognition, respect, and belonging. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones we need to hear from those who love us unconditionally, who see our worth clearly even when the rest of the world seems blind to it. The transformation in the ballroom's atmosphere was palpable as word of the revelation spread through clusters of wedding guests. What had begun as polite reception chatter evolved into something deeper and more meaningful, with conversations shifting from typical wedding small talk to discussions about fate, coincidence, and the unexpected ways our lives intersect with strangers who turn out to be anything but strange. I found myself at the center of attention in a way that felt entirely foreign, yet oddly comfortable. Unlike the earlier dismissal and peripheral treatment I had experienced, this attention came with warmth and genuine interest. Guests approached not with the polite but distant courtesy typically extended to unknown relatives, but with curiosity and respect for someone who had made a tangible difference in their community. Dr. Harrison, Michael's colleague from the accounting firm, introduced himself and mentioned that his wife had been treated at Millbrook General the previous year. "The emergency staff there is exceptional," he said with genuine appreciation. "It takes a special kind of person to work in that environment, to be the first face people see when they're scared and hurting." His words carried weight because they came from personal experience, not just polite conversation. Margaret's story had clearly resonated throughout Millbrook in ways I hadn't understood. As more guests learned about my connection to her recovery, they began sharing their own experiences with the ripple effects of her accident and survival. Janet Morrison, a teacher at Millbrook Elementary, mentioned how Margaret's daughter Emma had written a school essay about heroes, focusing on the medical professionals who had saved her mother's life. The essay had been so moving that it had been read at a school assembly, inspiring other children to think about careers in healthcare and public service. The interconnectedness of small-town life was revealing itself in unexpected ways. Tom Bradley, who owned Bradley's Hardware downtown, recalled how Margaret had started a support group for single parents after her recovery, crediting her near-death experience with giving her a new perspective on community and mutual aid. She always said that a stranger's kindness during her darkest hour taught her that we're all responsible for taking care of each other, he explained. That support group has helped dozens of families over the past 3 years. Sarah Mitchell had taken it upon herself to ensure that everyone understood the full significance of the evening's revelation. She moved gracefully through the reception, sharing details of the story with a storyteller's instinct for dramatic timing and emotional impact. Her version emphasized not just the medical care I had provided, but the human connection that had given Margaret the strength to fight for her life. Emma didn't just monitor vital signs and administer medication, Sarah explained to a group gathered near the dance floor. She sat with Margaret during the long night hours when the pain was worst, held her hand when she was afraid, and promised her that her children would be taken care of no matter what happened. She stayed past her shift, brought tea and blankets, and treated a complete stranger like family. Each retelling of the story seemed to add new layers of meaning and significance. I began to understand that Margaret's survival and recovery had become something of a local inspiration story, proof that Millbrook took care of its own, and that tragic circumstances could lead to positive outcomes. My role in that story, previously unknown and unacknowledged, was now being celebrated as an integral part of the community narrative. The wedding photographer, initially focused on capturing traditional moments between the bride and groom, had begun documenting the unusual turn the reception had taken. She approached me with professional curiosity, explaining that she had never witnessed a wedding where such a significant personal revelation had occurred. "This is the kind of story that defines what family really means," she said, adjusting her camera settings. "Would you mind if I took some photos of you with the Mitchell family? This moment deserves to be preserved." The request felt surreal. Hours earlier, I had been trying to remain invisible, hoping to avoid drawing attention to what I perceived as my outsider status. Now, I was being asked to participate in the formal documentation of family moments, to be included in photographs. That would become part of the permanent record of Michael and Rachel's wedding day. Bob Mitchell had undergone a complete transformation in his demeanor and behavior. Gone was the distant, dismissive authority figure who had ignored my presence earlier in the evening. In his place was a man who seemed genuinely humbled by the discovery of his mistake and determined to make amends through both words and actions. He introduced me to friends and colleagues with obvious pride, describing my professional dedication and the impact I had made on his family's life. "This is Emma Parker," he would say, his voice carrying the same warmth and respect he had shown to other honored guests. "She's an emergency room nurse at Millbrook General, and she's the person who helped save Margaret's life 3 years ago. We've been trying to find her ever since." The introduction invariably led to expressions of gratitude and respect from people who understood the demanding nature of emergency medicine and the skill required to work in such a high-pressure environment. The shift in social dynamics was remarkable to observe. Earlier in the evening, conversations had flowed around, me rather than including me, with guests making polite but minimal effort to engage with someone they perceived as peripheral to the main celebration. Now those same people sought me out, eager to hear details about my work and to share their own experiences with healthcare and community service. Mrs. Chen from Bella's boutique approached with tears in her eyes, explaining that Margaret had become a regular customer after her recovery, always shopping for her children with obvious joy and gratitude for every ordinary moment they shared together. "She told me once that surviving that accident taught her to treasure the simple pleasures of motherhood," Mrs. Chen said. "Taking her kids shopping for school clothes, attending their games and recitals, tucking them into bed at night. She said someone helped her understand that night that her children needed their mother, and she was determined never to take that responsibility lightly again." The impact of Margaret's story on her children was becoming clearer through these conversations. Emma, now 18 and headed to college, had indeed been inspired by her mother's experience to pursue nursing. Her high school guidance counselor, who was also at the wedding, mentioned that Emma's application essays had focused on the importance of compassionate care and the ways that medical professionals can provide hope during desperate circumstances. "She writes about wanting to be the kind of nurse who sees patients as whole people, not just medical cases," the counselor explained. "She's been accepted to the nursing program at Ohio State, and she says her goal is to work in emergency medicine, someday, to help people the way someone helped her mother." The generational impact of that February night was extending far beyond Margaret's immediate recovery. Her children had grown up with a story about kindness from strangers, about the importance of professional dedication, and about the ways that ordinary people can become heroes simply by doing their jobs with extraordinary compassion. Those lessons were now shaping their own career choices and life philosophies. Jack, the middle child, had joined the volunteer fire department as soon as he turned 16, inspired by the emergency responders who had helped his mother. His interest in becoming a paramedic stemmed directly from witnessing the coordinated effort that had saved Margaret's life and wanting to be part of that kind of life-saving work. Even Sophie, the youngest, had been affected by the experience in ways that were only now becoming apparent. Her teachers reported that she was unusually empathetic for her age, always the first to comfort classmates who were hurt or upset, often explaining that she understood what it felt like to be scared and that having someone care about you could make everything better. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with Father Mackenzie from St. Mary's Catholic Church, where Margaret and her children attended services. He shared that Margaret had become one of the parish's most dedicated volunteers, organizing meal trains for families in crisis and visiting sick parishioners in the hospital. "She always says that her recovery taught her about the importance of being present for people during their most difficult moments," Father Mackenzie explained. She credits a nurse she met during her own crisis with showing her how powerful it can be when someone simply refuses to let you face your fears alone. The religious dimension of Margaret's story added another layer of meaning to the evening's revelations. Her survival and recovery had been interpreted not just as successful medical intervention, but as a spiritual awakening that had led to years of service to others. The kindness I had shown during one terrible night had somehow catalyzed a transformation that had benefited countless other people in the community. Dr. Patel, the emergency room director at Millbrook General, had arrived at the wedding as a guest of one of Michael's colleagues. When he learned about the Margaret Sullivan connection, his reaction was one of professional pride mixed with personal affection. "Emma is exactly the kind of nurse who makes our emergency department exceptional," he told the gathered crowd. She has the clinical skills to handle the most complex cases, but she also has the emotional intelligence to provide comfort and hope when patients need it most. What she did for Margaret Sullivan is what she does every night for patients who come through our doors. His words carried particular weight because they came from someone who observed my work regularly and could speak to patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents. The validation from my supervisor, delivered in front of people who were learning to see me in a new light, felt deeply meaningful. The conversation with Dr. Patel also revealed information about my professional reputation that I hadn't fully grasped. He mentioned that I was frequently requested by name by patients who had been treated in our emergency room, that my patient satisfaction scores were consistently among the highest in the department, and that newer nurses often shadowed me to learn not just clinical procedures, but bedside manner and patient communication skills. Emma has a gift for making people feel safe and cared for during some of the worst moments of their lives, he explained. She has this ability to project calm competence while also conveying genuine warmth and concern. It's a combination that can't be taught in nursing school. It comes from character. The professional recognition was overwhelming in its unexpectedness. I had always focused on doing my job to the best of my ability, but I hadn't realized that my approach to patient care was being noticed and valued by colleagues and supervisors. The validation felt particularly meaningful because it came in front of family members who had sometimes questioned my career choices and life priorities. Rachel, who had been observing these conversations with what appeared to be growing amazement, finally approached me directly. Her expression was complex, mixing pride with what might have been regret or embarrassment. For years, our relationship had been strained by unspoken judgments about our different life paths and choices. "Emma," she said quietly, "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you worked hard. I knew you were dedicated to your job. But I never understood the impact you were having on people's lives." Her voice carried genuine emotion, and I could see her struggling to process the revelation that her sister, whom she had sometimes pitied or dismissed, was actually making a profound difference in their community. The conversation with Rachel was one of the most significant moments of the evening because it represented the possibility of healing a relationship that had been damaged by years of misunderstanding and unspoken resentment. She was seeing me not through the lens of family history and comparative achievements, but through the eyes of people who had been touched by my professional dedication and personal character. "I think I owe you an apology too," Rachel continued. "I've been so focused on conventional measures of success that I lost sight of what really matters. What you do every day, the lives you touch, the hope you provide to people during their darkest moments. That's more important than any sale I've ever made or any house I've ever sold." Her words represented a fundamental shift in our family dynamics, an acknowledgement that there are many ways to lead a meaningful life, and that professional success can be measured by impact on others, rather than just financial achievement or social status. The revelation about Margaret Sullivan had provided concrete evidence of my contributions to the community, making it impossible to dismiss my career as merely a job, rather than a calling. The evening was approaching its conclusion, but the energy in the ballroom remained high as guests continued to process the remarkable coincidence that had transformed a typical wedding reception into something much more significant. The band had resumed playing, and couples had returned to the dance floor, but the conversations continued to center around themes of service, community, and the unexpected ways that our lives connect with others. Michael and Rachel had taken the opportunity to make an impromptu announcement, thanking their guests for being part of not just their wedding celebration, but also the discovery of a connection that had enriched both families' understanding of service and gratitude. Their words transformed the personal revelation into a shared community moment, something that all the guests could take home as a reminder of the impact that kindness and dedication can have on others' lives. Bob Mitchell sought me out as the evening wound down, his expression serious but warm. "Emma," he said, I want you to know that this evening has been one of the most important of my life. Not just because we finally found the person we'd been looking for, but because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten during my years in law enforcement." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In police work, you see a lot of the worst in people. You respond to accidents and crimes and domestic disputes, and it can make you cynical about human nature. But tonight reminded me that for every act of cruelty or carelessness, there are people like you who choose to respond with kindness and competence. You represent the best of what our community can be." His words were particularly meaningful because they came from someone whose professional experience had given him a broad perspective on human behavior and community dynamics. The validation from a respected law enforcement veteran carried weight beyond personal gratitude, representing recognition from someone who had dedicated his career to protecting and serving the public. Sarah Mitchell had been documenting the evening with her phone, taking photos and videos that she planned to share with Margaret and her children. "They're going to be so amazed when they learn about this," she said excitedly. Margaret has wondered for 3 years whether her angel nurse even remembered her, whether she understood how much that night meant to our family. Now she'll know that kindness was remembered and valued, and that it led to something beautiful. The plan was for the Mitchell family to arrange a reunion with Margaret and her children, an opportunity for proper thanks and recognition that had been impossible when her identity was unknown. The prospect of seeing Margaret again, of learning about her recovery and her children's progress, felt like a gift that would bring closure to one of the most challenging professional experiences of my career. As Lily and I prepared to leave the reception, she looked around the ballroom with the satisfied expression of a child who had witnessed something important, even if she didn't fully understand all its implications. "Mommy," she said, "I think this was the best wedding ever." "Why do you think that, sweetie?" I asked. "Because everyone learned something important," she replied, with the simple wisdom that children sometimes possess. "And because now they all know how special you are." Her observation captured the essence of what had transpired during the evening. A wedding celebration had become a community recognition event, a moment when professional dedication and personal character had been acknowledged and celebrated in ways that rarely happen in ordinary life. The revelation about Margaret Sullivan had provided concrete evidence of impact and meaning, transforming assumptions and relationships in ways that would extend far beyond the wedding itself. The weeks following the wedding brought changes that rippled through my life in ways I could never have anticipated. What had begun as a single evening's revelation continued to unfold, creating new connections and opportunities that challenged everything I thought I knew about recognition, community, and the value of quiet service. The first significant development came just 3 days after the reception, when Sarah Mitchell called to arrange the long-awaited meeting with Margaret Sullivan and her children. The conversation was emotional from the very beginning, with Sarah's voice thick with gratitude as she explained how the wedding revelation had affected their entire family. "Bob hasn't been able to stop talking about it," Sarah said. "He keeps saying that meeting you was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for 3 years. He's a different person now, more thoughtful about how he treats people, more aware of the assumptions he makes about others." The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday afternoon at the Mitchell family home, a gathering that would bring together all the people whose lives had been touched by that February night 3 years earlier. Margaret had requested that her children be present, wanting them to meet the person who had become something of a legend in their family story. When Saturday arrived, I found myself more nervous than I had been on the night of the wedding. Meeting Margaret again would bring back memories of one of the most challenging periods of my career, but it would also provide closure and understanding that I hadn't realized I needed. Lily accompanied me, curious about the family we were going to visit and excited about the possibility of making new friends. The Mitchell home was warm and welcoming, with photographs covering every available surface and the comfortable clutter that comes with a house filled with love and activity. Margaret was waiting in the living room, and when I walked in, her reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She stood up from the couch, tears streaming down her face, and simply stared at me for a long moment before crossing the room to embrace me. "I can't believe it's really you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 3 years, I've carried this image in my mind of the angel who saved me. And now you're here. Real and present, and even more wonderful than I remembered." Her children were clustered around her, and I could see immediately how much they had grown and flourished since that terrible night. Emma, now 18, was tall and confident, with her mother's warm smile and an obvious intelligence that sparkled in her eyes. Jack, 16, had the earnest intensity of a young man who had seen more than his share of life's fragility. Sophie, 11 now, possessed a gentle maturity that seemed to come from understanding how precious ordinary family moments could be. "Mom talks about you all the time," Emma said, her voice carrying the same emotional weight as her mother's. "She says you're the reason we still have her, the reason our family is still together. I've been wanting to meet you since I was old enough to understand what happened that night." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Margaret recounted her memories of the accident and her time in the hospital with vivid detail, describing not just the medical care she had received, but the emotional support that had sustained her through the darkest hours. Her version of events painted a picture of my actions that seemed almost mythical in its significance. "You didn't just treat my injuries," Margaret explained, her eyes never leaving my face. "You treated my fear, my desperation, my overwhelming worry about what would happen to my children if I didn't survive. You sat with me when I was certain I was going to die, and you convinced me that I had reasons to fight." She described specific moments that I had forgotten or dismissed as routine parts of patient care. The cup of tea I had brought during her long night of recovery, the way I had held her hand during particularly painful procedures, the gentle reassurance I had provided when she woke up disoriented and afraid. Each memory she shared revealed the profound impact that small acts of kindness could have on someone facing a life-threatening crisis. "There was a moment, around 3 a.m, Margaret continued, when the pain was so intense that I wanted to give up. I remember thinking that maybe it would be easier to just let go, to stop fighting. And then you appeared beside my bed, and you said something that changed my entire perspective. I waited, curious about what words could have carried such significance, though I had no recollection of the specific moment she was describing. So much of that night had blurred together into a continuous cycle of monitoring, medicating, and providing comfort to multiple critically injured patients. You told me that my children needed their mother to be strong, that giving up wasn't an option because too many people were counting on me. But then you said something else, something that has guided me through every difficult moment since then." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "You said that surviving wasn't just about living through the night. It was about choosing to live fully every day afterward, to honor the gift of life by making it meaningful." The words she attributed to me sounded like something I might have said, reflecting the philosophy that had drawn me to emergency medicine in the first place. But hearing them repeated back to me, seeing their impact on an entire family's trajectory, gave them a weight and significance that I hadn't recognized at the time. Jack, who had been listening intently to his mother's story, spoke up with the passion of a teenager who had found his calling. "Because of what you did for Mom, I decided I wanted to be a paramedic," he said. "I've been volunteering with the fire department, and I'm planning to go to EMT school after graduation. I want to be the person who helps families stay together, who gives people the chance to keep living." His career choice, inspired by the emergency responders who had helped his mother, represented another generation being influenced by the events of that February night. The ripple effects were continuing to spread, creating new healthcare professionals who would carry forward the same commitment to compassionate care. Sophie, the youngest, had been sitting quietly throughout most of the conversation, but when she finally spoke, Her words carried a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 11 years. "I remember being really scared that night," she said. "I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something was very wrong. When Mom came home from the hospital, she was different. Not just because she was hurt, but because she seemed more grateful for everything." Margaret reached over and squeezed her youngest daughter's hand. "Sophie's right," she said. "That night changed how I see everything. Before the accident, I was so focused on what was missing from my life, what I didn't have, what hadn't worked out the way I'd planned. Afterward, I became obsessed with appreciating what I did have, with making sure my children knew how precious they were to me." The transformation Margaret described extended far beyond her immediate family. Over the past 3 years, she had become a community volunteer, organizing support groups for single parents, visiting patients at the hospital, and mentoring other women who were facing their own crises. Her near-death experience had become a catalyst for a life of service that had touched dozens of other families. "I started the single parent support group because I remembered how alone I felt that night," Margaret explained. "Not just physically alone in the hospital, but emotionally alone as someone trying to raise children without a partner. I wanted other parents to know that they weren't facing their challenges in isolation, that there was a community ready to help." The support group had grown from 5 members to over 30, meeting weekly at the community center and providing everything from childcare assistance to financial advice to emotional support during difficult times. Margaret's leadership had created a network of mutual aid that was making a tangible difference in the lives of Millbrook's single-parent families. Bob Mitchell, who had been quietly observing the reunion, spoke up with obvious emotion in his voice. "Emma," he said, "I need you to understand something. What you did that night didn't just save Margaret's life. It saved our family's connection to our grandchildren. It inspired a new generation of healthcare workers, and it created a ripple effect of service that has benefited our entire community." His words carried particular weight because they came from someone whose professional experience had given him a broad perspective on community impact and social change. As a retired police detective, he had seen how individual actions could influence broader patterns of behavior and community well-being. "In law enforcement," Bob continued, "we often talk about the broken window theory, the idea that small acts of neglect or crime can lead to broader social decay. But what you demonstrated that night was the opposite principle. Small acts of extraordinary kindness can inspire broader patterns of service and compassion." The philosophical dimension of Bob's observation resonated deeply with my own understanding of healthcare and community service. Every patient interaction was an opportunity to demonstrate care and competence, to provide not just medical treatment, but human connection during vulnerable moments. The cumulative effect of those interactions, multiplied across thousands of patient encounters, could indeed shape community culture and values. Sarah Mitchell had prepared a special surprise for the reunion, pulling out a scrapbook she had been compiling over the past 3 years. The book contained newspaper clippings about Margaret's community service, photographs of her children's achievements, and documentation of the various ways that Margaret's survival had influenced other people's lives. "I started keeping this after Margaret began volunteering at the hospital," Sarah explained. "I wanted to document how her recovery was creating positive changes in other people's lives. I thought someday we might find the nurse who had helped her, and I wanted to show how that one night of compassion had multiplied into years of service." The scrapbook was overwhelming in its thoroughness and emotional impact. Page after page documented Margaret's involvement in community organizations, her children's academic and extracurricular achievements, and testimonials from other families who had been helped by her volunteer work. The visual representation of sustained positive impact made it impossible to dismiss the significance of that February night. One particularly moving section contained letters from other single parents who had been helped by Margaret's support group. Their testimonials described how Margaret's story of survival and recovery had given them hope during their own difficult times, how her practical advice and emotional support had helped them navigate challenges ranging from financial difficulties to custody disputes to career changes. "Reading these letters helped me understand something important," Sarah said. Margaret's survival wasn't just a medical success story. It was a community investment. Every life she's touched, every family she's helped, every person she's inspired. All of that traces back to the moment when someone chose to provide extraordinary care during her crisis. The economic and social impact of Margaret's continued contributions to the community was staggering to consider. Her volunteer work at the hospital alone represented hundreds of hours of unpaid service. Her support group had helped families avoid crises that might have required expensive interventions from social services. Her mentoring of other single mothers had contributed to improved outcomes for dozens of children. Emma, Margaret's oldest daughter, had brought her college acceptance letters to share, wanting to show how her mother's experience had influenced her own career goals. Her acceptance to Ohio State's nursing program represented not just individual achievement, but the continuation of a cycle of service that had begun with her mother's treatment. "I've already contacted the admissions office about specializing in emergency nursing," Emma said with obvious excitement. "I want to work in the same kind of environment where you helped my mom. I want to be the person who sits with scared patients and convinces them that they have reasons to keep fighting." Her career choice represented the ultimate validation of the approach to patient care that had guided my work for years. The idea that my professional philosophy was inspiring a new generation of healthcare workers felt like the most meaningful recognition I could possibly receive. The reunion extended into the evening, with conversation flowing easily between families who had discovered unexpected connections and shared values. Lily had bonded immediately with Sophie, and they spent the later part of the visit playing games and sharing stories about school and friends. Watching my daughter interact with children who had been shaped by their own family's experience of crisis and recovery provided insights into resilience and growth that I found deeply moving. As we prepared to leave, Margaret presented me with a gift that she had been saving for 3 years, not knowing when or if she would ever have the opportunity to give it. The package contained a handmade quilt, created by members of her church congregation as a thank you gift for the unknown nurse who had helped save her life. Every square of this quilt was made by someone who heard the story and wanted to contribute. Something to express their gratitude, Margaret explained. Mrs. Patterson from the church quilting circle organized the project, and women from all over Millbrook contributed squares. Some of them had never met me, but they understood the importance of recognizing someone who had made such a difference. The quilt was beautiful beyond description, with each square featuring different patterns and colors, but unified by a theme of healing and hope. Some squares included embroidered messages of thanks. Others featured symbolic representations of medical care and recovery. The overall effect was a visual representation of community gratitude that was both artistic and deeply personal. "There's something else," Margaret said, handing me an envelope. "The support group took up a collection, and we've made a donation to the hospital's emergency department in your name. It's not much, but we wanted to contribute something concrete to support the kind of care that saved my life." The donation, while modest in dollar amount, represented an extraordinary gesture of gratitude from families who were often struggling financially themselves. The fact that single parents, many of whom were living paycheck to paycheck, had pooled their resources to support emergency medical care spoke to the profound impact that compassionate treatment could have on people's lives. The weeks following the reunion brought a series of unexpected developments that continued to transform my understanding of professional recognition and community impact. The story of the wedding revelation and the Margaret Sullivan connection had spread throughout Millbrook, creating a narrative about the importance of healthcare workers and the lasting impact of compassionate care. Dr. Patel approached me at work with news that the hospital administration wanted to feature my story in their quarterly newsletter and annual report. The recognition would highlight not just my individual contributions, but the broader commitment to patient-centered care that characterized Millbrook General's emergency department. Your story exemplifies what we're trying to achieve in emergency medicine, Dr. Patel explained. Technical competence combined with genuine compassion, clinical excellence paired with human connection. The hospital wants to use your experience as a model for training new staff and communicating our values. To the community, the prospect of professional recognition on such a scale felt overwhelming, but also deeply validating. For years, I had focused on doing my job to the best of my ability, without seeking external acknowledgement or praise. The sudden visibility felt strange, but it also provided an opportunity to advocate for the importance of treating patients as whole human beings, rather than just medical cases. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Daily Herald, requested an interview about the wedding, story and its aftermath. The reporter, Janet Williams, was particularly interested in the broader implications of the story for understanding community connections and the often invisible impact of public service. "What strikes me about your story," Janet said during our interview, "is how it demonstrates the interconnectedness of small-town life. You provided care for someone 3 years ago, not knowing who she was or what impact it would have. That care influenced her recovery, her children's life choices, her community service, and ultimately transformed your own family relationships. It's like a perfect example of how individual acts of kindness can create expanding circles of positive change." Her observation captured something essential about the experience that I had been struggling to articulate. The Margaret Sullivan connection had revealed the hidden networks of influence and impact that exist in every community, the ways that professional dedication and personal character can create lasting change even when the immediate effects are invisible. The newspaper article, published on the front page of the Sunday edition, generated responses from throughout the region. Letters to the editor poured in from people sharing their own stories of healthcare workers who had made a difference in their lives, from patients who had been treated with exceptional compassion, from families who had been supported during medical crises. The response demonstrated that Margaret's story was not unique, but rather representative of countless interactions between healthcare professionals and patients that create lasting bonds and inspire ongoing service. The visibility of my experience had given other people permission to acknowledge and celebrate the medical professionals who had touched their own lives. Rachel reached out to me several days after the newspaper article was published, wanting to continue the conversation we had begun at the wedding reception. Our relationship, strained for years by unspoken judgments and different life priorities, was beginning to heal in ways that felt both gradual and profound. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the wedding," Rachel said during our phone conversation. "Not just the revelation about Margaret, but my own reaction to learning about the impact you've been having in our community. I realized that I've been measuring success by all the wrong standards." Her admission represented a significant shift in our family dynamics, an acknowledgement that there are many ways to lead a meaningful life and that professional success can be measured by service to others rather than just financial achievement or social status. The concrete evidence of my impact on Margaret's family had made it impossible to dismiss my career as merely a job rather than a calling. "I want to find ways to be more involved in community service," Rachel continued. "Seeing how Margaret turned her own crisis into a commitment to helping other families has inspired me to think about how I can use my own skills and resources to make a difference." Her decision to become more actively involved in community service represented another ripple effect from that February night 3 years earlier. The story of compassionate care leading to recovery and community service was inspiring others to examine their own contributions to the common good. That the transformation in my relationship with my mother, Patricia, was perhaps the most significant change of all. For years, she had viewed my life choices with disappointment and concern, worried that single motherhood and a demanding career were preventing me from achieving conventional measures of success and happiness. "Emma," she said during one of our conversations. "I owe you an apology. I've been so worried about what other people thought of our family situation that I lost sight of what really mattered. You've been making a difference in people's lives every day, and I was too focused on social expectations to see it." Her acknowledgement meant more to me than any professional recognition or community honor could have provided. The approval and respect of family members, particularly parents, carries emotional weight that public accolades cannot match. Her recognition of the value and importance of my work represented a healing of generational tensions that had affected our family for years. The long-term impact of the wedding revelation extended far beyond personal and family relationships. The story had become part of Millbrook's community narrative, a reminder of the importance of healthcare workers and the lasting impact of compassionate service. Local organizations began reaching out to me for speaking engagements, wanting to share the story as an inspiration for their own members and volunteers. The Millbrook Rotary Club invited me to speak at their monthly meeting about the experience and its lessons for community service. The Millbrook Chamber of Commerce featured the story in their newsletter as an example of the kind of dedicated professionals who make their community special. The hospital's volunteer organization asked me to participate in their annual recognition dinner, highlighting the connection between professional staff and community volunteers. Each speaking engagement provided an opportunity to advocate for the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances or background. The Margaret Sullivan story had become a teaching tool for discussing the ripple effects of kindness and the ways that professional dedication can create lasting positive change. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Ohio State Board of Nursing selected me to receive their annual Award for Excellence in Patient Care, citing the Margaret Sullivan story as an example of nursing practice that exemplifies the profession's highest values and standards. The award ceremony in Columbus was attended by nursing professionals from throughout the state, providing an opportunity to share the story with colleagues who understood the challenges and rewards of emergency medicine. The recognition from professional peers felt particularly meaningful because it came from people who understood the demands of the work and the importance of maintaining compassion despite difficult circumstances. In my acceptance speech, I emphasized that the Margaret Sullivan story was representative of the work being done by emergency nurses throughout Ohio every day. Every shift, in every emergency department, nurses are providing not just medical care but human connection to people facing their most frightening moments, I said. The recognition I'm receiving today belongs to all of us who have chosen to dedicate our careers to caring for others during their times of greatest need. The response to the speech was overwhelming, with colleagues sharing their own stories of patient interactions that had created lasting connections and inspired ongoing service. The award ceremony became a celebration not just of individual achievement, but of the profession's commitment to compassionate care. As I reflect on the month since that September wedding, I'm struck by how a single evening's revelation transformed not just my own understanding of recognition and worth, but the lives of everyone connected to Margaret Sullivan's story. The ripple effects continue to expand, creating new connections and inspiring ongoing service in ways that seem almost miraculous in their scope and significance. Lily, now 8 years old, has developed a new understanding of her mother's work and its importance to the community. She often tells her classmates about the lives her mother has saved and the families she has helped, displaying a pride that reflects her growing comprehension of the difference that dedicated service can make. "My mom is a hero," she told her teacher during a class discussion about community helpers. "She helps people who are hurt and scared, and she makes them feel better. Sometimes she saves their whole families." Her simple description captures the essence of what emergency nursing means to me and why I chose this profession despite its challenges and demands. The opportunity to provide hope during desperate circumstances, to offer comfort during frightening moments, and to contribute to the preservation and improvement of human life provides meaning that transcends financial compensation or social recognition. The Margaret Sullivan connection has given me a new perspective on the importance of every patient interaction and the potential for lasting impact that exists in even the most routine aspects of emergency care. Every frightened family member who needs reassurance, every patient who requires not just medical treatment but human connection, every moment when compassion can make the difference between despair and hope. All of these represent opportunities to create positive change that may extend far beyond the immediate crisis. The story that began with a wedding invitation and a father-in-law's dismissive behavior has become a testament to the power of service, the importance of recognition, and the unexpected ways that our lives intersect with others in meaningful and lasting ways. The transformation of Bob Mitchell from judgmental stranger to grateful advocate demonstrates how quickly relationships can change when understanding replaces assumption. Most importantly, the experience has reinforced my commitment to the profession I chose and the values that guide my approach to patient care. The knowledge that compassionate treatment during one terrible night created ripple effects that are still expanding 3 years later provides motivation and inspiration that will sustain me through whatever challenges lie ahead. Margaret Sullivan's recovery was not just a medical success story, but a community investment that continues to yield dividends in the form of ongoing service, inspired career choices, and strengthened commitment to caring for others. Her survival created a legacy of service that has touched dozens of families and inspired a new generation of healthcare workers. The recognition I have received as a result of the wedding revelation has been gratifying, but the most meaningful aspect of the experience has been the reminder of why I chose emergency nursing in the first place. The opportunity to make a difference in people's lives during their most vulnerable moments, to provide hope when all seems lost, and to contribute to the healing and recovery of individuals and families represents a calling that transcends ordinary career considerations. As I continue my work at Millbrook General Hospital, I carry with me the knowledge that every shift provides opportunities to create positive change that may extend far beyond the immediate medical crisis. The Margaret Sullivan story has become a constant reminder that compassionate care can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities, inspiring ongoing cycles of service and kindness that can last for generations. The wedding that began with dismissal and misunderstanding ended with recognition and celebration. But more importantly, it revealed the hidden connections that bind communities together and the lasting impact that dedicated service can have on the lives of others. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones we don't even know we're living, until a moment of revelation shows us the true significance of our daily choices and professional dedication. The autumn air carried a crispness that reminded me of that wedding night 6 months ago. But everything else about my life had fundamentally shifted in ways I was still discovering. Standing in the parking lot of Millbrook General Hospital after my shift, I watched the sun rise over the familiar skyline and marveled at how recognition could transform not just external circumstances, but internal understanding of purpose and worth. My phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret Sullivan, now a regular correspondent whose weekly updates had become highlights of my routine. Today's message contained photos from her son Jack's graduation from EMT training, his proud smile captured in a moment that connected directly back to that February night 3 years earlier when his mother's survival had inspired his career choice. The photograph showed Jack in his crisp new uniform, standing beside his training instructor and holding a certificate that represented months of rigorous preparation for a career in emergency medical services. His motivation, traced directly back to witnessing the coordinated effort that had saved his mother's life, exemplified how individual acts of professional dedication could inspire vocational choices that would benefit countless future patients. Margaret's accompanying message read, "Jack wanted you to be the first to know that he passed his certification exam with the highest score in his class. He says he's going to carry your example of compassionate care into every emergency call he responds to. Thank you for giving us a model of what healthcare excellence looks like." The pride I felt reading her message was different from any professional. satisfaction I had experienced before. This wasn't just recognition for clinical competence or technical skill, but acknowledgement that my approach to patient care had influenced someone else's understanding of how to serve others during their most vulnerable moments. Inside the hospital, preparations were underway for the annual Emergency Medicine Excellence Symposium, an event that would bring together healthcare professionals from throughout Ohio to discuss best practices and innovative approaches to patient care. Dr. Patel had asked me to present the Margaret Sullivan case study as an example of how comprehensive care extends beyond immediate medical intervention to include emotional support and family communication. The invitation to speak at a professional conference represented a level of recognition that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. My presentation would focus not on dramatic life-saving procedures or complex medical techniques, but on the importance of treating patients as complete human beings whose recovery depends as much on hope and dignity as on clinical intervention. Preparing the presentation had required me to analyze and articulate aspects of my nursing practice that I had previously considered intuitive rather than systematic. The process of examining how I approached patient communication, family support, and emotional care had revealed patterns and principles that could indeed be taught and replicated by other healthcare professionals. The case study format allowed me to present Margaret's story not as an isolated incident of exceptional care, but as an example of how standard emergency nursing practices could be enhanced through intentional focus on patient dignity and emotional needs. The goal was to demonstrate that compassionate care wasn't an additional burden on already overwhelmed emergency departments, but an integral component of effective treatment that could improve both patient outcomes and professional satisfaction. Working with Dr. Patel to develop the presentation had also revealed the extent to which my approach to patient care had influenced the culture within our emergency department. Newer nurses had been observing and modeling their own patient interactions on techniques they had seen me use, creating a ripple effect of improved bedside manner that was benefiting hundreds of patients monthly. What you've done, Dr. Patel explained during one of our planning sessions, is demonstrate that clinical excellence and compassionate care aren't competing priorities. They're complementary aspects of comprehensive treatment that work together to optimize patient outcomes. His observation reflected a broader understanding within the medical community that patient satisfaction and clinical results were interconnected rather than separate measures of healthcare quality. The Margaret Sullivan story had become a teaching tool for illustrating how emotional support and human connection could enhance rather than interfere with medical treatment. The symposium presentation was scheduled for the following month, but word of the topic had already generated interest from healthcare professionals throughout the region. Requests for advance copies of the presentation materials had come from nursing schools, hospital administration programs, and continuing education coordinators who wanted to incorporate the principles into their own training curricula. The academic interest in my approach to patient care felt surreal, given that I had never considered myself a researcher or educator. My nursing practice had evolved organically through years of experience and reflection, guided by instinct and empathy rather than formal theoretical frameworks. The discovery that my methods could be analyzed, systematized, and taught to others represented a new dimension of professional impact that I was still learning to navigate. Margaret's daughter Emma had contacted me the previous week with news that her nursing school professors had included the Margaret Sullivan case study in their curriculum on patient-centered care. The synchronicity of Margaret's daughter studying nursing while simultaneously learning about her mother's treatment created connections that seemed almost too perfect to be coincidental. It's strange to read about your own family's experience in a textbook, Emma had written in her email, but it's also incredibly inspiring to see how one night in the emergency room has become a model for how nurses should approach their work. I'm proud that our story is helping train the next generation of healthcare professionals. Her perspective on seeing her family's trauma transformed into educational material for future nurses provided insights into how personal experiences could be translated into broader social benefits. The academic use of Margaret's story represented another form of the ripple effects that had been expanding ever since that February night 3 years earlier. The nursing school connection had also led to invitations for me to participate in student mentoring programs and clinical rotation, supervision. The opportunity to directly influence the training of new nurses felt like a natural extension of the patient advocacy and family support that had always been central to my professional identity. Working with nursing students had revealed how much my own practice had evolved over the years through accumulated experience with thousands of patient interactions. Explaining to students why I chose specific approaches to family communication or patient comfort required me to articulate decision-making processes that had become second nature, but were actually based on years of observing what techniques were most effective in different circumstances. One student, Jennifer Martinez, had been particularly interested in understanding how to balance emotional support with clinical responsibilities in high-pressure emergency situations. Her questions had pushed me to think more systematically about time management and priority setting in ways that enhanced my own practice while providing teachable principles for the next generation. "I want to be the kind of nurse who makes patients feel safe and cared for," Jennifer had told me during one of our mentoring sessions. "But I'm worried about burning out or getting too emotionally involved. How do you maintain professional boundaries while still providing genuine compassion?" Her question touched on one of the most challenging aspects of emergency nursing, the balance between professional competence and human connection that allows healthcare workers to provide excellent care without becoming overwhelmed by the emotional weight of constant exposure to human suffering. My response had drawn on years of experience managing that balance, but also on insights gained from understanding the long-term impact of the Margaret Sullivan case. "Professional boundaries aren't walls that keep you separate from patients," I had explained. "They're frameworks that allow you to provide consistent, reliable care without losing yourself in the process." The mentoring relationship with Jennifer and other nursing students had become one of the most rewarding aspects of the recognition that had followed the wedding revelation. The opportunity to directly influence the development of future healthcare professionals felt like a multiplication of impact that could benefit countless patients over the coming decades. Bob Mitchell had surprised me by attending one of my speaking engagements at the Millbrook Chamber of Commerce, where I had been invited to discuss the importance of healthcare professionals in community development. His presence in the audience represented the complete transformation of our relationship from mutual dismissal to mutual respect and support. After the presentation, Bob had approached with his characteristic directness, but now applied to positive rather than negative purposes. "Emma," he had said, "I want you to know that watching you speak about your work has given me a new understanding of what public service really means. You've inspired me to think about how I can use my own retirement to support the kind of community values you represent." His words had been particularly meaningful because they came from someone whose own career in law enforcement had been dedicated to public safety and community protection. The recognition from a fellow public servant carried weight that purely academic or administrative acknowledgement could not provide. Bob's renewed engagement with community service had taken the form of volunteering with local emergency response organizations and advocating for increased funding for hospital emergency departments. His law enforcement background gave him credibility with municipal officials and budget committees that could be leveraged to support healthcare infrastructure improvements. The political dimension of healthcare advocacy was new territory for me, but Bob's example demonstrated how professional recognition could be translated into concrete support for the institutions and programs that served community needs. His advocacy efforts had already resulted in increased funding for emergency medical equipment and training programs that would benefit future patients and healthcare workers. Sarah Mitchell had documented Bob's transformation in a series of photographs and journal entries that captured his evolution from someone who made assumptions about others based on limited information to someone who actively sought to understand and support the contributions of all community members. Watching Bob change has been one of the most remarkable aspects of this whole experience, Sarah had told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. He's always been a good man, but discovering his mistake about you forced him to examine his own biases and assumptions in ways that have made him more thoughtful and intentional about how he treats people. Her observation about personal growth and self-reflection highlighted how recognition and understanding could be transformative for all parties involved, not just those receiving acknowledgement. The wedding revelation had changed Bob's perspective as much as it had changed my own circumstances, creating opportunities for personal development that benefited the entire community. The relationship between the Mitchell family and my own family had deepened beyond the initial wedding night revelation. Regular gatherings and shared meals had created genuine friendships that transcended the professional connection that had brought us together. Lily had formed particularly close bonds with Margaret's children, relationships that were teaching her about resilience, service, and the importance of supporting others during difficult times. Watching Lily interact with Sophie Sullivan during one of our family gatherings had provided insights into how children process and learn from stories of crisis and recovery. Sophie's matter-of-fact discussions about her mother's accident and recovery had helped Lily understand that scary things sometimes happen to families, but that love and determination could overcome even serious challenges. Sophie's mom was really hurt, but the doctors and nurses helped her get better, Lily had explained to one of her classmates, demonstrating her growing understanding of healthcare as a community resource that helped families stay together during emergencies. Her childlike interpretation of Margaret's story emphasized the family-centered impact of medical care, a perspective that reinforced my own understanding of emergency nursing as work that extended far beyond individual patient treatment to encompass family support and community stability. The extended network of relationships that had developed around Margaret's story now included not just the immediate families involved, but colleagues, friends, and community members who had been touched by various aspects of the experience. The Millbrook Community Foundation had established a scholarship fund in honor of compassionate healthcare workers, inspired by the recognition that had followed the wedding revelation. The scholarship program provided financial support for local students pursuing careers in healthcare, with selection criteria that emphasized not just academic achievement, but demonstrated commitment to service and community engagement. The first recipient had been Emma Sullivan, whose essay about her mother's experience and her own calling to nursing had exemplified the values the scholarship was designed to promote. Margaret's involvement in selecting scholarship recipients had provided another avenue for her ongoing community service, allowing her to directly support the next generation of healthcare professionals who would carry forward the principles of compassionate care that had been so important in her own recovery. The scholarship selection process had also created opportunities for community members to share their own experiences with healthcare professionals who had made significant differences in their lives. The application essays and nomination letters revealed dozens of stories similar to Margaret's, demonstrating that compassionate care was being provided throughout the community by dedicated professionals whose contributions often went unrecognized. Reading through those scholarship applications had reinforced my understanding that the Margaret Sullivan story was representative rather than unique, that emergency departments and healthcare facilities throughout the region were staffed by professionals who regularly provided the kind of care that could transform individual lives and strengthen community bonds. The recognition I had received as a result of the wedding revelation had created platforms and opportunities to advocate for all healthcare workers, not just emergency nurses. Speaking engagements and media interviews had provided chances to highlight the demanding nature of healthcare work and the importance of supporting professionals who chose careers dedicated to serving others during their most vulnerable moments. The advocacy dimension of recognition had been unexpected but deeply meaningful, providing ways to contribute to broader conversations about healthcare policy, professional development, and community support for medical institutions. The personal story had become a vehicle for addressing systemic issues that affected thousands of healthcare workers throughout Ohio and beyond. Rachel's commitment to increased community involvement had evolved into a specialized focus on supporting healthcare workers and their families. Her real estate expertise had been valuable in helping medical professionals find affordable housing in Millbrook, while her business connections had created networking opportunities for healthcare workers seeking professional development or career advancement. I realized that I had skills and resources that could be used to support the people who were already making the biggest difference in our community, Rachel had explained during one of our conversations about her new volunteer commitments. Instead of looking for ways to stand out myself, I decided to focus on helping others succeed in work that was already more important than anything I was doing. Her perspective shift represented another form of the ripple effects that had emerged from the wedding revelation, demonstrating how recognition of one person's contributions could inspire others to examine their own potential for service and community support. The healing of my relationship with Rachel had been one of the most personally meaningful aspects of the entire experience. Years of unspoken tension and comparative judgment had given way to mutual respect and collaborative engagement in community service. Our different skills and resources had proven to be complementary rather than competitive, creating opportunities for partnership that strengthened both of our contributions to Millbrook's well-being. Patricia, my mother, had become one of the most enthusiastic promoters of the story and its lessons about recognizing the value of different forms of success and achievement. Her own evolution from disappointment about my life choices to pride in my professional impact had been dramatic and sustained, extending to her relationships with other family members and community members whose contributions she had previously undervalued. I spent so many years worrying about what other people thought about our family situation that I completely missed the extraordinary work Emma was doing right here in our own community, Patricia had said during a family gathering. I was so focused on conventional measures of success that I couldn't see the real impact she was having on people's lives. Her acknowledgement had meant more to me than any professional award or public recognition could provide. The approval and understanding of family members, particularly parents, carried emotional weight that external validation could not match. Her recognition of the value and importance of my work had healed generational tensions that had affected our family dynamics for years. The family healing that had resulted from the wedding revelation had extended to extended family members and family friends who had witnessed the transformation in relationships and understanding. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and longtime family friends had all been affected by seeing how quickly assumptions and judgments could be overturned when genuine understanding replaced superficial assessments. Uncle David, who had barely acknowledged me at family gatherings for years, had become one of my most vocal supporters and advocates. His construction business had donated materials and labor for hospital improvement projects, inspired by his new understanding of the importance of healthcare, infrastructure, and his desire to support institutions that employed people like me. I never really understood what Emma did for work, he had admitted during a recent conversation. I knew she was a nurse, but I thought that meant she just followed doctor's orders and did routine medical tasks. Learning about the impact she's had on families like the Sullivans made me realize that nursing is actually one of the most important jobs in our community. His recognition represented the broader community education that had occurred as the Margaret Sullivan story spread throughout Millbrook. People who had previously viewed healthcare work as routine employment began to understand the skill, dedication, and emotional intelligence required to provide excellent patient care during emergency situations. The community education aspect of the story's impact had been amplified by local media coverage and social media sharing that had spread the story far beyond Millbrook's boundaries. Comments and messages from people throughout Ohio and neighboring states had revealed how many families had experienced similar moments of life-changing care from healthcare professionals whose names they had never learned and whose contributions had never been formally recognized. One particularly moving message had come from a woman in Toledo, whose husband had survived a heart attack thanks to emergency care that included not just medical intervention, but emotional support for their terrified children who had witnessed the crisis. Her description of the nurse who had comforted her family while also providing clinical care had been nearly identical to Margaret's account of her own experience, demonstrating the consistency of compassionate practice among dedicated healthcare professionals. The regional and state-level recognition that had followed local media coverage had created opportunities for policy advocacy and professional development that extended far beyond individual acknowledgement. Invitations to participate in healthcare, workforce development committees, and patient care standards reviews had provided platforms for influencing how healthcare institutions trained and supported their staff. The policy dimension of recognition had been both challenging and rewarding, requiring me to translate personal experience and individual patient stories into systemic recommendations that could benefit thousands of healthcare workers and patients throughout Ohio. The process had deepened my understanding of how individual practice connected to broader healthcare delivery systems and quality improvement initiatives. Working with state-level healthcare organizations had also provided insights into how the Margaret Sullivan story fit into broader patterns of patient experience and healthcare outcomes. Research data had confirmed that patient satisfaction and clinical results were indeed interconnected, with compassionate care contributing to better recovery rates, reduced readmission rates, and improved compliance with treatment recommendations. The evidence-based support for compassionate care practices had strengthened my confidence in advocating for approaches that prioritized patient dignity and emotional support alongside clinical competence. The combination of personal experience and research validation had created compelling arguments for healthcare institutions to invest in training and supporting staff in comprehensive patient care approaches. Margaret's continued involvement in community service had evolved to include formal partnerships with healthcare institutions and professional organizations. Her patient perspective had proven valuable in developing policies and procedures that better supported families during medical crises, while her communication skills had made her an effective advocate for patient rights and family-centered care. The partnership between Margaret's lived experience and my professional expertise had created collaborative opportunities that benefited both individual patients and healthcare system improvement. Our joint presentations at conferences and training sessions had demonstrated how patient and provider perspectives could be integrated to enhance care quality and patient satisfaction. The collaborative approach had also influenced my own understanding of healthcare delivery, providing patient and family perspectives that had enriched my clinical practice and teaching. Margaret's insights into what had been most helpful and most frightening during her hospitalization had informed my approach to communicating with other patients and families facing similar crises. The educational impact of our collaboration had extended to nursing schools and medical training programs throughout the region, with Margaret's story being used to teach healthcare students about the long-term impact of compassionate care and the importance of treating patients as complete human beings rather than just medical cases. The academic integration of Margaret's experience had created additional opportunities for research and scholarship focused on patient-centered care and its outcomes. Graduate students in nursing and healthcare administration had used our story as a foundation for thesis projects and research studies that were contributing to the growing body of evidence supporting compassionate care practices. The research dimension of recognition had been unexpected but deeply meaningful, providing ways for personal experience to contribute to broader professional knowledge and evidence-based practice improvement. The translation of individual patient stories into systematic research had demonstrated how personal experiences could inform policy development and training curricula. As I prepared for the upcoming Emergency Medicine Excellence Symposium presentation, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by a single evening's revelation. The wedding night that had begun with dismissal and misunderstanding had initiated a cascade of recognition, relationship healing, and professional development that continued to create new opportunities and connections. The presentation would focus on practical applications of the principles demonstrated in Margaret's case, providing actionable strategies that emergency department staff could implement to enhance their own patient care practices. The goal was not to promote my individual story, but to demonstrate how standard nursing practices could be enhanced through intentional focus on patient dignity and family support. The symposium attendance had exceeded expectations, with healthcare professionals from throughout Ohio and neighboring states registering to attend sessions focused on patient-centered care and compassionate practice. The interest in the topic had confirmed that Margaret's story resonated with healthcare workers who recognized similar experiences in their own practice, but had lacked frameworks for understanding and replicating the most effective approaches. The night before the symposium, I stood in my apartment looking at the handmade quilt that Margaret's church congregation had created as a thank you gift. Each square told a part of the story, from the emergency room crisis through recovery and community service, creating a visual narrative that captured the expanding impact of that February night 3 years earlier. Lily was asleep in her bedroom, surrounded by photographs and mementos from the families who had become part of our extended community through Margaret's story. Her understanding of her mother's work had evolved from simple pride to sophisticated appreciation for the ways that individual actions could create lasting positive change in other people's lives. The transformation of our family's circumstances had been profound, but the most important changes had been internal rather than external. The recognition and validation had been gratifying, but the deeper satisfaction came from understanding that work I had always considered routine professional duty had actually been creating expanding circles of positive impact throughout my community. The Margaret Sullivan story had become a lens through which I understood the broader meaning and significance of emergency nursing, but it had also revealed similar stories of impact and service that were occurring throughout the healthcare system. Every shift brought opportunities to provide not just medical care, but human connection that could influence patients and families in ways that extended far beyond immediate crisis resolution. The symposium presentation would emphasize that Margaret's story was representative rather than exceptional, that emergency departments throughout Ohio were staffed by professionals who regularly provided the kind of care that could transform individual lives and strengthen community bonds. The goal was to encourage other healthcare workers to recognize and celebrate their own contributions, while also providing tools for enhancing their practice. As I fell asleep the night before the symposium, I thought about Margaret's latest message about Jack's EMT certification and the pride in her voice when she talked about her son's career choice. The ripple effects of that February night were continuing to expand, creating new healthcare professionals who would carry forward principles of compassionate care to future generations of patients and families. The story that had begun with a wedding invitation and a father-in-law's dismissive behavior had become a testament to the power of recognition, the importance of understanding, and the unexpected ways that our professional dedication could create lasting positive change in our communities. The experience had taught me that every patient interaction was an opportunity to plant seeds of hope and healing that might grow in ways I would never fully comprehend. Tomorrow's presentation would share those lessons with hundreds of healthcare professionals who had their own Margaret Sullivan stories, their own moments of providing care that extended far beyond medical intervention to encompass human dignity and family support. The multiplication of understanding and recognition that could result from those connections represented the ultimate validation of the approach to nursing that had guided my career from the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.